I stepped onto the bus like I did every evening, my briefcase heavy with papers from a long day at work. To the other passengers, I was just another face in the crowd, blending into the hum of the city. But I wasn't just anyone. I'm a lawyer, respected in my field, someone who spent years clawing my way up through late nights and endless cases. Nobody saw that. Nobody cared. Then it started. Snickers from a group of strangers, their eyes locked on me, picking apart my skin, my build, my very existence. Their words cut deep, turning me into a punchline in front of everyone. The whole bus heard it, but nobody said a thing. I stood there, gripping my briefcase, feeling the weight of their stares. That moment, that humiliation, it changed something inside me. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every person who's ever been made to feel small. And here's how it all unfolded. My name's Marcus Hayes, and before that evening on the bus, I thought I'd built a life that spoke for itself. I'm a lawyer, 32 years old, working at a firm in downtown Chicago. I didn't get there by luck. I grew up in a neighborhood where most kids didn't dream beyond the block. My mom worked double shifts as a nurse, and my dad was a mechanic, always fixing what was broken. They pushed me to study, to fight for something better. I listened. Late nights at the library, scholarships, law school, it all paid off. Now, I walk into courtrooms, argue cases, and win respect from colleagues who once doubted me. My office is lined with diplomas, proof of what I've earned. But outside those walls, it's different. On the street, in stores, or on public transit, I'm not Marcus the lawyer. I'm just a black man, 6'2", broad-shouldered, someone people size up before I open my mouth. I've dealt with it since I was a kid. Whispers, stares, assumptions about who I am. "You don't belong here," a teacher once told me in high school, her eyes narrowing. I proved her wrong, but those moments stick. I learned to shrug off the comments, to keep my head high. At work, I'm judged by my mind, my arguments. Out here, it's my skin, my build, my presence. I'd gotten good at tuning it out. A clerk following me in a store, I'd smile and keep moving. A stranger clutching their bag when I sat nearby, I'd pretend not to notice, but every slight left a mark, like scratches on a car you don't see until the light hits just right. I told myself it didn't matter. I had a career, a purpose, a life I was proud of. My briefcase stuffed with case files was my shield. Proof I wasn't what they thought. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that no matter how far I climbed, some people would only see what they wanted. That evening, when I stepped onto that bus, I had no idea how deep those scratches ran, or how one moment would bring them all to the surface. It was a Tuesday evening, and the Chicago air felt heavy with late summer heat. I boarded the number 6 bus downtown, my tie loosened, my briefcase gripped tight. The bus was packed, commuters, students, folks heading home from late shifts. I found a spot near the middle, standing, one hand on the pole, the other holding my work. The hum of conversations and the rumble of the engine filled the space. I was just another guy heading home, ready to crash after a 10-hour day at the firm. My mind was still on a case I'd been prepping, a tricky contract dispute. I barely noticed the group of teenagers near the back at first. Then I heard it, a low chuckle, sharp enough to cut through the noise. "Yo, look at this guy," one of them said, loud enough for me to catch. I glanced over. 4 kids, maybe 17, sprawled across the seats, their eyes fixed on me. The one talking, a skinny kid with a faded hoodie, nudged his friend. "Man, he's built like a linebacker, but check that suit." "Who's he trying to fool?" His friend snickered, adding, "Bet he's just pretending to be somebody." Their voices carried, and I felt heads turn. A woman nearby shifted in her seat, glancing at me, then away. I tried to ignore it. I'd heard worse. "Focus on the case," I told myself, staring at the floor. But the comments kept coming. "Yo, his skin's so dark, he blends into the shadows," another one said, laughing like it was the cleverest thing. The group erupted, their voices bouncing off the bus walls. My chest tightened. I gripped my briefcase harder, the leather creaking under my fingers. These kids didn't know me. They didn't know I'd spent years studying, winning cases, earning my place. To them, I was just a target. More people were listening now. A guy in a construction vest smirked. An older woman looked out the window, pretending not to hear. Nobody said a word to stop it. The air felt thicker, like it was pressing me down. I wanted to disappear, to be anywhere else. But I couldn't. I was trapped in that moment, their words stripping away everything I'd built. My suit, my briefcase, my title, none of it mattered here. I was just a black man, too big, too dark, too out of place in their eyes. I kept my face blank, but inside, my thoughts were racing. Why me? Why now? I'd dealt with this kind of thing before, but this felt different, louder, bolder, like they wanted the whole bus to join in. I wondered if I should say something, shut them down. But what if it escalated? What if I became the angry black guy they expected? My heart pounded and I felt the weight of every stare, every unspoken judgment. This wasn't just about those kids. It was about every time I'd been made to feel less than. And standing there, I realized ignoring it wasn't working anymore. The bus lurched forward, but the teenagers' voices didn't let up. Their laughter grew sharper, like knives thrown in my direction. "Man, he's taking up space just standing there," the skinny kid said, his tone dripping with mockery. "What's with that briefcase? You stealing it or what?" His friends howled, feeding off each other's energy. The words hit me harder than I expected, each one peeling back a layer of the armor I'd built over years. I stood there, still holding the pole, my knuckles tight around it. My suit felt like a costume now, something that didn't belong on me in their eyes. I tried to focus on the city lights flashing past the window, but my mind kept pulling me back to when I was 12. A group of kids at school had cornered me in the hallway, laughing about how my skin was too dark to see in the dark. I'd laughed it off then, pretending it didn't sting, but it did. It always did. Now, decades later, I was a grown man, a lawyer with a corner office, and yet here I was, feeling like that kid again. The same shame, the same helplessness. My diplomas, my case wins, my life, they meant nothing in this cramped, humming bus. The group got bolder. "Bet he's one of those diversity hires," another kid said, his voice loud enough to carry to the front. A few passengers glanced back, their faces a mix of curiosity and discomfort. Nobody spoke up. The silence was louder than the laughter, like a weight pressing on my chest. I caught the eye of a woman in a nurse's uniform, hoping for some kind of acknowledgement, some sign she saw me as more than their punchline. She looked away, adjusting her bag. I was alone in this, just like I'd been as a kid. The world kept moving, but I was stuck in their gaze. Inside, my thoughts were a storm. Why does this still happen? I'd worked so hard to prove myself, to be someone nobody could question. I'd won cases that saved companies millions, earned handshakes from judges, built a life my parents could be proud of. But to these kids, to this bus, I was just a stereotype. A black man who didn't fit their idea of what success should look like. My briefcase, stuffed with contracts and notes, felt heavier now, like it was mocking me too. What good was it if it couldn't shield me from this? The skinny kid leaned forward, his voice cutting through again. "Yo, why you so quiet? You scared or something?" His friends laughed louder, and I felt the heat rise in my face. I wanted to snap back, to tell them who I was, what I'd done. But my throat tightened. What could I say that wouldn't make it worse? If I raised my voice, I'd be the angry black man they expected. If I stayed quiet, I was letting them win. My heart pounded, and I could feel every eye on the bus waiting for my next move. The air was thick with their judgment, and I was drowning in it. I thought about my mom, how she'd tell me to keep my head up, to not let anyone dim my light. But right then, I didn't feel like a light. I felt like a shadow, reduced to nothing but my skin and size. The kids kept going, their words blending into a hum of cruelty. I wanted to disappear, to walk off this bus and never look back. But something else was stirring inside me. A spark of anger, not loud or explosive, but steady. I wasn't that 12-year-old anymore. I'd fought bigger battles than this. And as the bus rattled on, I knew I couldn't stay silent much longer. The bus swayed as it turned a corner, but the teenagers' voices stayed relentless, slicing through the hum of the engine. "Man, he's just standing there, taking it," one of them said, his tone sharp with glee. "What's in that fancy briefcase? Comic books?" Their laughter erupted again, and I felt it like a physical weight, pressing me into the floor. My fingers tightened around the pole, the metal cold against my palm. I'd been here before, not just in this moment, but in 1,000 others, swallowing the hurt, keeping my head down. But something snapped inside me. I wasn't going to let this be another scar I carried in silence. I took a deep breath, my chest tight with a mix of fear and resolve. I'd spent years learning to control my voice in courtrooms, to speak with precision, to command attention. If I could face a judge, I could face these kids. I turned slowly, locking eyes with the skinny one who'd been leading the pack. His smirk faltered for a split second, like he wasn't expecting me to look back. The bus was quiet now, the other passengers' eyes darting between me and the group. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. My voice came out steady, low, but clear enough for everyone to hear. "You don't know me," I said, holding his gaze. "You don't know what I do, what I've built, or what I carry in this briefcase. But You think you've got me figured out because of how I look. You're wrong. The words hung in the air, and I saw a few passengers shift uncomfortably. The skinny kid opened his mouth, but I didn't give him a chance. I'm a lawyer. I fight for people's rights every day. I've earned my place, and I don't owe you an explanation. But I'm done letting you talk like I'm nothing. The silence that followed was heavy, like the air before a storm. The kids' friends exchanged glances, their laughter gone. A woman near the front clutched her purse, her eyes wide. The construction worker who'd smirked earlier looked at the floor. I could feel my heart pounding, but I kept going. You think this is funny, but it's not. You're not just talking about me. You're talking about every person who's ever been judged for their skin, their size, their existence. And I'm not here for it. Not today. The skinny kid tried to recover, muttering, "Whatever, man, relax." But his voice was weaker now, less sure. His friends didn't back him up. I saw a flicker of shame in one of them, the one who'd been quiet, his eyes dropping to his sneakers. I didn't feel triumph, though. I felt exposed, like I'd just laid myself bare in front of strangers. My briefcase was still in my hand, its weight grounding me. Those papers, contracts, case notes, years of my life, were proof of who I was. But saying it out loud, claiming it in this moment, felt different. It felt like a line I'd crossed. I turned back to the window, my breath steadying. The bus was still moving, the city lights blurring past. I expected the kids to start up again, to throw another jab to save face. But they didn't. The air had shifted. A man in a suit near the back gave me a small nod, like he understood. The nurse from earlier looked at me, her expression softer now, almost apologetic. I didn't need their approval, but it was something, a crack in the wall of silence that had surrounded me. Inside, my thoughts were racing. Had I said too much? Would they twist my words, make me the bad guy? I'd spent so long avoiding these moments, keeping my anger in check, blending in where I could. But standing there, I realized something. Silence hadn't protected me. It hadn't stopped the stares, the assumptions, the laughter. It had only let them grow louder. I thought about my mom again, how she'd faced her own battles as a black woman in a hospital, where patients sometimes refused her care. She never backed down. And now, neither would I. The bus stopped at a light, and I felt the weight of that moment settle in. I wasn't just Marcus the lawyer anymore, standing quietly with his briefcase. I was Marcus, the man who spoke up. I didn't know what would happen next, if those kids would double down, if the other passengers would forget this by tomorrow. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let this moment define me. I was going to define it. And as the bus rolled forward, I made a promise to myself. This wasn't the end of the fight. It was the beginning. The bus hissed to a stop at my street, and I stepped off, the weight of that moment still clinging to me. My heart was still racing from speaking up, my words echoing in my head. I'd said what needed saying, but I didn't feel like a hero. I felt raw, like I'd ripped open a wound in front of strangers. The city air was cooler now, but it didn't calm the storm in my chest. I walked home, my briefcase swinging at my side, wondering if I'd made things worse. Would those kids spread the story, twist it to make me the villain? Or would the other passengers just forget, like it was another Tuesday evening? By the next morning, I was back at my desk, diving into case files, trying to bury the memory of the bus, but it wasn't that simple. My phone buzzed around noon, a text from a colleague, Sarah, who I'd known since law school. "Marcus, you're viral," it read, with a link to a post on X. I froze, my coffee going cold in my hand. I clicked the link, and there it was. A grainy video, shot from someone's phone on the bus. It showed me standing, gripping the pole, my voice steady as I spoke to those kids. The caption read, "This guy shut down some punks on the number 6 bus. Respect." My stomach twisted. I hadn't noticed anyone filming. The video was short, just 30 seconds, but it captured everything. My words, the kids' stunned faces, the awkward silence that followed. It had thousands of likes, hundreds of comments. Some called me brave, others said I'd overreacted. A few were uglier, repeating the same kind of trash the kids had thrown at me. I scrolled, my throat tight, unsure whether to feel proud or exposed. Sarah called me an hour later. "Marcus, that was you, right? People at the firm are talking. They're blown away." I mumbled something about it not being a big deal, but she cut me off. "It is a big deal. You said what a lot of us wish we could." By the end of the day, the video had spread beyond X. A local news blog picked it up, then a bigger outlet. They dug into my background. Someone recognized me from a case I'd won last year, a high-profile contract dispute that saved a small business from bankruptcy. My name was out there now. Marcus Hayes, 32, Chicago lawyer, stood up to harassment on a public bus. The articles painted me as some kind of hero, but I didn't feel like one. I felt like the same guy who'd stood there, humiliated, while a bus full of strangers watched. Then came the twist. One of the passengers, the man in the suit who'd nodded at me, turned out to be a professor at a local college. He'd posted his own account on X, describing how he'd seen the whole thing unfold. This wasn't just about one man, he wrote. It was about how we all let this happen. I should have spoken up too. His post got traction, and soon people were sharing stories of their own, times they'd faced similar taunts, times they'd stayed silent. The conversation wasn't just about me anymore. It was about the bus itself, that cramped space where equality was supposed to exist, but didn't. The kids from the bus weren't named, but their faces were clear in the video. By the next week, someone identified the skinny one as a high school senior from a nearby suburb. His name didn't matter to me, but the fallout did. His school issued a statement about addressing behavior without specifics. A few ex-users tracked down his profile, and he'd gone silent, his account locked. I didn't feel sorry for him, but I didn't feel vindicated either. He was just a kid, parroting the kind of hate he'd probably heard his whole life. The real problem wasn't him, it was the system that let him think it was okay. My firm's partners called me in for a meeting. I braced myself, expecting a lecture about keeping a low profile. Instead, they shook my hand. "You represented us well," one said, "not just as a lawyer, but as a person." They wanted me to speak at a community event about workplace diversity, to share my story. I hesitated. I wasn't a public speaker, not outside a courtroom. But then I thought about the nurse on the bus, the one who'd looked away. Maybe she'd needed someone to speak up too. Maybe this was bigger than me. The news coverage grew, and so did the comments. Some were supportive, calling for change, for people to check their biases. Others were vicious, accusing me of playing the victim, of making it about race. I read them all, each one a reminder of why I'd spoken up in the first place. My mom called, her voice thick with pride. "You did what I always told you, Marcus. You held your ground." But I wondered if she knew how much it cost me, how much it still hurt to think about those moments on the bus. What struck me most was how the truth came out, not just about me, but about everyone on that bus. The professor who regretted his silence, the kids who thought they could mock a stranger without consequence, the passengers who watched, complicit in their inaction. My briefcase, my suit, my title, they hadn't protected me, but they'd forced people to see me differently. I wasn't just a black man in a suit. I was a man who'd earned his place, who'd fought for it, and who wasn't going to let anyone reduce him to a joke. As the story spread, I started getting messages, strangers thanking me, saying they'd faced the same thing, a store clerk trailing them, a coworker's subtle jab. One message from a young black woman in law school hit me hard. "I saw your video," she wrote. "It made me feel like I can keep going." I read it over and over, my eyes stinging. This wasn't about me anymore. It was about every person who'd been made to feel invisible, every person who'd carried their own briefcase full of dreams, only to have it mocked. The bus, that ordinary Tuesday evening, had become a mirror. It showed me who I was, but it also showed everyone else who they were. The kids, the passengers, the city, they all had to face themselves now. And me, I was still Marcus Hayes, still carrying my briefcase, still fighting. But I wasn't fighting alone anymore. The weeks after the bus incident felt like a blur, like I was living in someone else's story. The viral video had turned my moment of defiance into something bigger, something I hadn't planned for. I went back to my routine, courtrooms, case files, early mornings at the firm. But the world outside my office had shifted. People recognized me now, not just as Marcus the lawyer, but as the guy from the bus. Strangers would nod at me in coffee shops, their eyes lingering like they knew my story. It was strange, humbling, but also heavy. I'd spoken up to reclaim my dignity, not to become a symbol. Yet, here I was. The kids from the bus didn't face legal consequences. Nobody pressed charges, and I didn't want that anyway. But their actions caught up with them in other ways. The skinny kid, the one who'd led the taunts, was called out online after his school's statement hit the news. X-posts showed his name circulating, not with threats, but with disappointment. Teachers, neighbors, even his own friends weighing in. "He's better than this," one post read, from someone claiming to know him. I didn't care about his punishment, but I hoped he'd think twice before mocking another stranger. His friends, the ones who'd laughed along, stayed quiet, their social media accounts going dark. The internet has a long memory, and it wasn't kind. The real shift happened beyond them. The professor's post, the one where he admitted his silence, sparked a local campaign. A community group in Chicago started hosting forums on public transit safety, focusing on how bystanders can step up. I got an email inviting me to speak at one. I almost said no. Public speaking wasn't my thing, and I was still processing the attention. But then I thought about the nurse on the bus, her averted eyes, and the man who'd nodded at me. They'd stayed silent, but maybe they'd wanted to act. Maybe they just needed someone to show them how. I showed up at the forum, my briefcase in hand, feeling like I was walking into a courtroom. The room was packed, people of all ages, all backgrounds, crammed into a community center downtown. I told my story, not with anger, but with the same steady voice I'd used on the bus. I talked about the weight of being judged, the sting of silence from others, and how I'd decided to speak. The audience listened, some nodding, some wiping their eyes. Afterward, a woman in her 50s approached me, her hands trembling. "I was on a bus like that once," she said. "I wish I'd had your courage." Her words stuck with me, a reminder that this wasn't just my fight. The local news kept the story alive, framing it as a wake-up call. One article quoted a city official saying they'd review transit policies to address harassment. I didn't hold my breath. Systems don't change overnight. But it was a start. On X, people debated what justice looked like. Some wanted the kids expelled, others wanted training programs in schools. A few still called me oversensitive, but their voices were drowned out by stories like mine, people sharing their own moments of being reduced to a stereotype. It felt like a crack in the wall, small but real. At the firm, my partners didn't let it go. They started a pro bono initiative, offering legal aid to victims of public harassment. They asked me to lead it. I hesitated, unsure if I wanted to keep reliving that night. But then I remembered the law student's message, the one who said my video kept her going. I said yes. It wasn't about fixing the world. It was about giving people a chance to be heard, like I'd been heard. My first case was a young woman, a cashier, who'd been taunted at her job for her accent. Helping her felt like closing a loop, like I was turning my pain into something solid. I thought a lot about justice in those weeks. It wasn't about the kids getting suspended or the headlines fading. It was about the conversations that didn't stop. My mom called me one evening, her voice warm but firm. "You didn't just stand up for yourself, Marcus," she said. "You stood up for all of us." I wanted to believe her. I still carried the hurt from that bus, the way those words had cut me open. But I also carried something new, a sense of purpose. I'd taken a stand, and it had rippled outward, touching people I'd never meet. The bus itself became a kind of legend. I rode it again a month later, same route, same time. Nobody stared, nobody laughed. Maybe they recognized me, maybe they didn't. But I sat there, my briefcase on my lap, feeling different. I wasn't invisible anymore, not to myself. I'd claimed my space, not just on that bus, but in the world. Justice wasn't a punishment or a victory lap. It was knowing I could walk through that kind of fire and come out stronger, carrying others with me. Months after that night on the bus, I wasn't the same Marcus anymore. I still caught the number 6 to work, still carried my briefcase, still fought cases in courtrooms. But something had shifted inside me, like a gear clicking into place. That moment of standing up, of speaking when I could have stayed silent, changed how I saw myself. I wasn't just a lawyer anymore. I was someone who could make a difference, not just in a courtroom, but in the world outside it. The scars from that evening were still there, but they didn't define me. They pushed me forward. I started volunteering with a local organization that mentored young people facing discrimination. Kids like I'd been, black, brown, different, labeled before they could even speak. I'd meet them after work, sitting in community centers or coffee shops, listening to their stories. One boy, Jamal, reminded me of myself at 15. Quiet, angry, carrying the weight of every sideways glance. He told me about being mocked at school for his clothes, his hair, his skin. I didn't give him platitudes. I shared what happened on the bus, how I'd felt small but found my voice. "You're more than their words," I told him. He nodded, his eyes steady, like he was starting to believe it. The firm's pro bono initiative grew, and I took on more cases. Each one felt personal. A teacher harassed for her accent, a teenager taunted for his weight. Helping them wasn't about winning in court. It was about giving them back their dignity, the way I'd fought for mine. Every time I stood up for someone, I remembered that bus, the silence of the passengers, and how I'd broken it. I wasn't fixing the world, but I was building something, a space where people could feel seen. The story of that night never fully faded. People still recognize me sometimes, offering quiet words of thanks, or sharing their own experiences. A woman stopped me at a grocery store once, saying she'd seen the video and started speaking up at her job when coworkers made racist jokes. Her voice shook, but her eyes were fierce. Moments like that kept me going, proof that one stand could ripple outward. I thought about the bus often, how it was a microcosm of everything wrong and everything possible. It was where I'd felt invisible, but also where I'd claimed my place. My mom's words echoed in my mind. You stood up for all of us. I carried that with me, not as a burden, but as a purpose. I wasn't a hero, just a man who'd had enough. But maybe that was enough to start something. That evening on the bus, I walked away not broken, but remade. I stepped off into the Chicago night, my briefcase heavy with papers, but my heart lighter with resolve. I'd faced the laughter, the stares, the weight of being reduced to a stereotype, and I'd won, not by silencing those kids, but by refusing to let them silence me. I was Marcus Hayes, and I'd never let anyone turn my life into their joke again. Thank you for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to share, but I hope it resonated with you, maybe even stirred something inside. I'm Marcus Hayes, just a guy who decided to speak up one evening on a Chicago bus. That moment changed me, and I hope it sparks something in you too. If you've ever felt judged, reduced to a label, or silenced by a crowd, know you're not alone. Your voice matters, and it can shift the world, even just a little. I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever faced a moment like mine, where you had to choose between staying quiet or standing up? What happened? How did it change you? Or maybe you were a bystander, wishing you'd acted. What would you do differently now? Drop your thoughts below and let's keep this conversation going. Together, we can challenge the silence and build a world where everyone's dignity is seen. Thanks for being here, for listening, and for caring. Let's make these stories matter.